This week was the week that Hamiltonians who want to challenge this council and get on there and get elected got to register at City Hall. And it is also the week that we saw some of the most disgusting, repulsive power plays and that I have seen in this city, at least in the last 4 years of this council, and that is saying a lot. I'm trying really hard not to swear here, but let me tell you, there's good reason to. Let's start with the fact that the candidates who went down to register at City Hall got kicked off the City Hall forecourt. Kicked off the forecourt of our City Hall, the one we pay for, public property, the one that we defended, that we stood down and got the white supremacists off of, we the citizens. The forecourt where council let white supremacists and yellow vesters and a big bus full of hate from Alberta roll up on the forecourt. And they let that bus roll up. But no, the candidates who go down to register to run for office against this council, they get kicked off the forecourt. And what makes it worse is after weeks of pedestrians getting hit and run, including Boris Brott, these candidates and their supporters were forced to stand down by the big truck traffic blowing down Main Street. But wait, there's more. There is more. There is a report that came out this week that incidents of hate crime have gone up 35% in Hamilton. 35% under new Chief Bergen, right? He's supposed to be the new chief. Everything's supposed to get better. 35%. We are the hate capital of Canada already. Hate crimes are up 35%. And what are we hearing from our mayor and council about it? Well, you know, the mayor did say that there's no place for Confederate flags flying in Binbrook, but then he said that we should re-erect the Sir John A MacDonald statue. I'm so glad that Dr. Ameil Joseph is here from McMaster University to talk about all things race and leadership and accountability, because you know what? The election is coming up and there's some great candidates running, but we got to understand what the stakes are in this and make sure that we make the right choices for Hamilton. Let's go. It is such a pleasure to have back on the OShow the man who knows so much about what's happening with racism and hate in Canada and what we need to be doing about it. I also consider him a go-to when it comes to leadership and accountability. It is, of course, Dr. Ameil Joseph from McMaster University. Doctor, welcome back to the OShow.
Thanks for having me.
So yesterday, something happened, and I want to get into a bunch of things with you. Let me just start with the Red Hill first. As you know, some Red Hill stuff came out, and we won't get into it today, but I'm going to have Joey Coleman, who's been covering the Red Hill inquiry really closely, on the program next week on the OShow to tell us all what's happening, you know, so we don't miss a thing in keeping people accountable and being informed. So that's next week. And I want to talk to you about the 35% increase in hate in the city in the last week. I can't even believe that report. But first, if you don't mind, you were down at City Hall forecourt. You were there with the other candidates who are registering. First of all, why were you there and what did you see?
Well, I went to hear the announcements, from Kojo Damptey, who's running for Ward 14 City Council, from Sabrina Dahab and Ahona Mendy, who are running for Hamilton Wentworth District School Board trustee roles. And, you know, it was a peaceful event. People were setting up tables and painting signs, campaign signs, support signs for the people who were announcing their candidacy. And right at 12 o'clock when it was supposed to begin, security came out and approached Kojo, and he went to talk to them, and that delayed the event for some time. And then they came out and asked us all to move towards the sidewalk outside of City Hall. So we couldn't be anywhere on the forecourt or anywhere on city property, which I thought was a very strange occurrence, because I know other city councilors have made their announcement at that forecourt. It's kind of a tradition now, thankfully. You know, we haven't had a lot of Black or racialized city councilors, but Matthew Green, who was the first, also announced his candidacy there. And it's been kind of a tradition. So it was jarring to see it happen. I think
But I
completely
mean,
unnecessary.
did Matt Green, before he got on council, I know he was vocal around the no casino thing at the time, but did he write a scathing op-ed about the mayor not serving racialized citizens like Kojo? I mean, the mayor has even written op-eds about Kojo. Do you think it was personal? Do you think it was because of Kojo's criticism of City Hall and its power structure around especially issues around race and inclusivity?
It's that, like, I didn't get to hear the conversation, but it's a strange uh, occurrence when it's someone like Kojo making an announcement outside of City Hall that they would wait to disrupt his event right at the point of its beginning, and push us all to the sidewalk.
And we're not
Which
talking about a
wasn't.
sidewalk in a little town, right? We're talking about a sidewalk next to essentially a 4-lane highway that transport trucks use. There's a photo circulating online that has the crowd standing right like a foot away from a transport truck barreling down Main Street. Did you feel safe on the sidewalk? I mean,
It was pretty crowded. We were asked to basically obstruct the sidewalk, which didn't make any sense at all. And that is the very space where a bus jumped that curb, and parked there when we've had a rise in hate in the city for a long time, but when hate groups specifically were organizing outside of City Hall.
that's right.
So it was definitely a kind of precarious position to be in.
Yeah, and I've got a video of that bus. I was there that day and took a video that went actually across the country because people couldn't believe it. And since then, City Hall's solution is to put up bollards from buses coming up on city property. But citizens who are literally registering to run in a democratic process get pushed off the forecourt. When you said it's kind of strange, is it though? I mean, we have had, as I mentioned, the mayor take direct attack at a citizen, Kojo, in an op-ed in The Spectator. We have had not just a history of City Hall not being concerned with white supremacists either working in City Hall or on the forecourt on Saturdays, but we've also had a situation where the hate capital of Canada designation, we've now seen a report that has come out from police saying that hate crimes are up 35% this year. I don't even know what that brings them up to, doctor. Like, what are we at, 135 now? Like, where are we in terms of how much hate there is in this city? So should we be surprised that a racialized candidate who has been vocal about issues around race and critical of this council is suddenly his announcement for running for Ward 14 is cut off?
It's an all too familiar experience. We've had a number of incidents in Hamilton whereby people who speak out against systemic racism, against injustice, who are trying to engage citizens who are amongst the communities who are most marginalized, who are most left out, they've been antagonized, identified as troublemakers, actively antagonized when they're providing aid to others in the community.
They've been arrested.
And even arrested.
Yeah.
That's right.
They've been arrested, and it took a hue and cry from the community to get the charges dropped against these young caregivers. I mean, so we have seen. I have no experience of racism, and I've never been a victim of it. I have never been affected by the systemic racism because I'm not racialized. In the last year, though, just doing this show and just talking to people who are on the front lines of this, it seems painfully clear that there is what's the word for it? A discrimination against, and trying to marginalize, trying to shut down, trying to silence people who are raising these issues. And it's across institutions in the city. And I have to bring up the fact that not just Fred Eisenberger, the mayor, but other, people in the community have said that, priority one should be re-erecting the statue of Sir John A MacDonald, a statue by its very essence traumatizes Indigenous peoples, a statue that people asked the city council to take the courageous move and put it in a museum, do whatever, but don't make us look up at it on our public places. And they wouldn't do it, so it was torn down. And the priority is putting that thing back up. I mean, how did you feel when you heard that news, Doctor?
It is the kind of thing that makes you feel confused at the outset because that kind of announcement was being made in the wake of an event, a press conference being hosted by the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center to condemn the flying of a Confederate flag in Binbrook, which the mayor at that event asked this individual to take it down.
Right.
And then, almost in the same breath or shortly thereafter, suggested that it was possibly a good idea to resurrect this statue of Sir John A MacDonald, someone who is widely understood to have been directly involved in campaigns to starve Indigenous people to death.
Right. I mean, it's as Jon Stewart said when he saw Confederate statues down in the US, he realized it's a wallpaper of racism, that people never felt free. They never felt respected or equal. Is that how it feels, Ameil, to you? I know you can't speak for everyone, but is that how it feels to you as a racialized individual when you see city leadership turn a blind eye to racism and even in some ways let it breed, it feels like? And how does it make you feel as a resident, as a citizen of the city?
I think we're looking for better listeners in leadership. We're trying to get people to understand that the misinformation that's out there, that is circulating, that's trying to bolster these positions, that try to mainstream, racist beliefs, are not the side we want our leadership to be defending. When people identify the very clear histories attached to Sir John A MacDonald that are genocidal histories. These are the kinds of things that we don't set aside to then privilege a position that erases that history and undermines all of the community members who've raised their voice, who repeatedly delegate at council to inform city council and the mayor about what is not working for us and what needs to change. And the listening is so it's so poor. It's just been antagonistic to a lot of this work, and it undermines efforts to educate the public on some of these matters that I think broader society is becoming more nuanced at appreciating in terms of analysis. We have had a kind of a renewed attention for the devastating violence of residential schools. And all of those who have signaled the discourse that this was necessary or important. You mentioned, the reference to removing the Indian from the child, which was, the kind of ethos of this genocidal campaign to remove Indigenous people from lands and to remove Indigenous history, culture, and knowledge from the people themselves. These are the kind of devastating histories that we need to confront and name and take action on in ways that are both symbolic and material for the citizens of Hamilton and beyond. And it's not the kind of thing that we should backtrack on and dilute or omit, this knowledge from.
So does it come from a lack of awareness of the breadth and depth of those genocidal policies and of racism and of its reality? Or is it a bias towards maintaining the power structure that is, a bias towards keeping things, just the way that they've been working for too long, for white people especially? There's a system of advantage, there's a system of privilege, it breeds power, and it breeds giving one seat to the next seat, to the next seat, to the next seat, right? I mean, it serves white people to keep things the way that they are. And it was actually, Hugh was on our program a few months ago, and he had a brilliant statement about how he's, as a white man, he has benefited from systemic racism, and he's trying very hard to confront that and deal with that and make the system more equitable. But I mean, so if there's an intrinsic benefit to not listening, Dr. Ameil, what's going to make them listen?
I think there is also, wider campaigns, wider organizations that try to bolster some of the talking points, that try to mainstream some of these hateful ideas in ways that divorce them from their original project, that remove them from their historical and social political context. And that makes it easy to pick them up and wield them in ways that are in defense of status quo systems and structures and policy and law. And well, as I said earlier, those kinds of omissions don't help us. They're definitely the kinds of things that erase complicity. Our complicities, we're all complicit to some degree in these settler colonial structures and systems and policies and practices and law. We, of course, are differentially arranged in these orders depending on who we are. So some of us experience the disproportionalities and inequities more robustly, more consistently across areas of society. And because of that built obliviousness, the way society has been arranged around us to forego attentions to the violence that has been infused in the way we live, it's easy to defer to the knowledge bases that seek to omit, to exclude, critique. And our efforts, our job should be to not do that, to not play into the ongoing omissions that serve those who benefit the most privileged. You know, there was, well, if with the Confederate flag incident in Binbrook, I think people know, we know on paper that it's, you know, widely understood the Confederate flag to be a symbol of white supremacy, and the flag was associated with the American Civil War, and there's, you know, a star on that flag for each of the states that declared to secede. Like there were specific declarations by states such as Mississippi and Georgia and Texas, South Carolina, that very clearly indicated their opposition to ending slavery. So that is a fact. It's not something we can divorce. Yet there is quite a bit of misinformation and disinformation being circulated that suggests that the flag is some sort of a symbol of freedom or liberty. And people do the same with symbols like Sir John A MacDonald. This is someone who is foundational to the nation of Canada. But what that omits is the histories of colonization and conquest. You know, the kind of stars and bars Confederate flag that we're talking about was never officially a flag of the Confederacy, but it was wielded by the KKK. It was wielded by, in the 1940s, there's that organization, it was a political party actually called the Dixiecrats, they were a party that opposed ends to segregation. They wanted to maintain segregation. And, you know, when we talk about in systemic racism in the history of that discourse, how the Supreme Court decision Brown versus the Board of Education, which was trying to end segregation in schools, that was countered by people who carried that flag, who protested at those events. We saw it at Charlottesville, at the white supremacist rally there. You know, when when Dylan Roof killed 9 Black people at
the church.
At the church, yeah, the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. It was 2015, which is not that long ago. You know, the NAACP boycotted South Carolina for having waved the Confederate flag, the stars and bars, on Capitol property, and that campaign went on for 15 years. Eventually, they agreed to remove it after Dylan Roof shot up that church and killed those people. But there has long been a kind of set of efforts to mainstream racist beliefs by attempting to distance these ideas from their original project, to wield hate symbols in celebration of heritage.
Yeah.
You know,
and now freedom, right? He said,
right.
The person who had the flag up said it was a symbol of freedom. But, you know, to have the mayor say that there's no place, and we've heard this from him before, for hate in Hamilton, there's no place for that Confederate flag, he said, and kudos for taking that stand. But then in the same breath, to your point, to say, you know, we should put that statue back up of that other racist, right? And there's a Yale, I'm sure you're more familiar with it than I am, but there's, I believe it's out of Yale, there's sort of a methodology for looking at these issues and saying, first you have to weigh the whole life of the individual in question, and did their racist acts or did their acts of this outweigh the other accomplishments or other things in life. Like as step one, just kind of look at the bigger picture on it. And sure, some people might look as foundational what Sir John A MacDonald did for the country, but at what cost? I mean, how? So to me, it's not even a question. But more importantly, just the conversation, I think, Doctor, hurts people. Just putting that out there from the mouth of the mayor, I think. And tell me if you understand the same, at least from some of the tweets that I've been seeing from Indigenous people saying, this re-traumatizes, this hurts, we hate this.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of thing that makes you feel like you have a mayor that doesn't represent you. You have someone who is not listening, who's not interested in the things we talk about when we talk about reconciliation and when we talk about addressing systemic racism. When you can't make the analytical connection between all hate symbols and their impacts on communities, when they're telling you these things are hurtful and harmful, not only because they exist, but what they symbolize and the discourses that they carry and advance that omit our attentions to our complicities to some of these violent and oppressive structures is the kind of thing. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just going to say it's the kind of thing that perpetuates the hurt and mistrust in the city.
Well, I did an op-ed this week, speaking of trust, saying that, this election is about reestablishing trust. It is about trust. Any other issue, train, waterfront, area rate, whatever. To me, they're secondary to trust. The public trust has been lost from whether it's Sewergate or what we're finding in the Red Hill inquiry or what we saw with the 49-year secret deal for downtown, which might be a great deal, but we don't know because we're not allowed to see it, right? And as Marvin Ryder said last week, there's something very paternalistic about saying, you can't see information. So if they can lie to us or keep one truth from us, what other truths are they hiding, right? So there is an erosion, a breakdown of trust. And I think that the election is all about that. And just before we get into the election, just for our last minutes here, Doctor, when we're talking about Kojo and whether it was strange, to use your word, or whether it was deliberate and intentional, I think back to some history recently, right? There was, after that ridiculous, whatever it was called, I forget the name of it, the Integrity Commissioner, that's why I can't remember it because it seems so counterintuitive. The Integrity Commissioner complained against citizen Cameron Kretsch from the LGBTQ community for allegedly putting something out there. And they spoke to it, right? Reputation damage in my mind was tried to be done to Cameron Kretsch. And now he's of course running in the election. But after that ruling, Councillor Whitehead tweeted Kojo Damptey and said, let's see how far these powers go now. As like, I took that as a deliberate threat, and many did. And HCCI made $5,000 that day just in solidarity with Kojo. But it didn't stop there. We saw when the very anti-racism center that you referenced earlier, setting up to talk about the Confederate flag at that press conference, remember, to get the job, Lyndon was told by Councillor Ferguson, as long as you're not talking to that Kojo guy, as long as there's a line between, you and that guy, I had both of them on the program right after to say, forget that, what line? What white person has ever told there's a line between who they can associate or work with? It's just, so to me, it feels as though it has been an established pattern of trying to push down the voices that are trying to get this city to be less full of hate. Doctor, what do we need? What do you want to see? I mean, the election effectively, in my mind, has started. People are registering now. What leaders do we need? What characteristics or qualities are you looking for? Should we be taking to the ballot box with us?
I think the kind of leaders that the status quo is worried about because of how honestly they raise issues, how honestly they listen to people who live in Hamilton, are the kind of leaders we want. One of the things Kojo said in his speech at the announcement yesterday was that the current city councillor, who is holding the seat in Ward 14 is someone who received extensive donations from developers, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And Kojo said, that's not going to be us. We're not going to take that money. If those checks come, we're sending those checks back. That's the kind of position that we need. And it's the kind of position that actually exposes quite a bit for how city councilors work and how development has influence in politics. It changes a lot. He talked about how we need to think about public health and climate change, how we need to think about systemic racism in a way to change the way we think about democracy itself, so that we're engaging everyone, the most left out. And I think those are powerful, yet should be, widely understood statements that we understand to be inherent qualities in a leader coming forward.
Although I suspect there'll be campaigns that are already starting that will label it as radical, right? And use these buzzwords and try to start culture wars. I see the statue as a culture war. It's very American politics that we're seeing creep into this municipal election as the old guard grasps on in kind of a Gollum-esque way to their power, right? My precious. They're not going to let it go easily. I want to have you back often during this election, Dr. Ameil, because you always lift us to the higher understanding of these things, but also you were right there literally on the ground when some of this was happening. So thank you so much for being on the OShow and being one of the voices people trust on the issues that they care about.
Thanks for having me.
And if you're enjoying this content, as you know, we're doing this as a community service to get the voices out that people need to hear in this election and beyond. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will keep getting the great content to you. If it's local politics, it is the OShow, and we are your election show.